Still to this day, I'll have a committee that count how many women and how many men are reviewed, like in the New York Times Book Review and other places where books are reviewed. And it's still, you think it'd be at least even Steven now, but it's not. It's still greatly skewed toward male writers. So.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
At least it's being talked about, and hopefully in the near future we'll see a change on that front. I think authors like Gillian Flynn, I think she flipped the narrative there and got people looking that they can write hard-hitting just as well as a man.
Exactly. And if you look at the thrillers being published today, so many of them are being published by women, which was not true even 10 years ago. So yeah, we're definitely moving in the right direction, but we still have a ways to go.
That's good.
Okay, so if we want to give some advice to up-and-coming authors, perhaps some female authors, what stumbling blocks did you have to climb over to get your first book published?
Well, it was interesting. I had written this book, and I don't know that I even really thought about getting it published while I was writing it. It was just, I had got this idea, and I was thinking about it night and day, and I had plotted out this whole book in my mind, and then I wrote it by hand in spiral notebooks between 9 and 11 at night after my kids were in bed. So when it was done, I thought, maybe I should try to get it published. So I typed it up on a manual portable typewriter, and I started sending it out to it wasn't a mystery, it was a historical set in the Old West. And I had been reading Max Brand and Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour and all those old Western writers, which is how I came up with an idea for a Western. And so I thought it was a Western, and I sent it out to 5 publishers over a course of a couple years who published Westerns, and they all rejected it. And by the time the 5th rejection came back to me, I had finally figured out that it actually was a historical romance set in the Old West. So I had sent it to an agent, and she said it wasn't ready for publication, but I should send it to Zebra Books, which is now Kensington. And she said they kind of specialize in first-time authors, and I should give it a try and send it to them, and they might have some pointers for me. So I'm in complete ignorance. I did exactly the right thing. I typed up a cover letter that said this agent had suggested I send the book to them. So it immediately went to the top of the slush pile, and the editor read it. And it was like less than a week later, I got a phone call from this, and this editor said, "I'm Karen Cohen. I'm an editor with Zebra Books, and I didn't know a lot about publishing, but I knew they don't call you on the phone to tell you you're rejected." So I got very excited. And she said, "I really like your book. It's really funny." That was the first I knew it was funny. She said, "But it needs to be 200 pages longer, and it needs more sex." I thought, oh, okay. And then I had read some romances, and I realized, in my book, they kissed a few times. And I knew that was not going to cut it with a romance. So she said, "I'll sit down with you, and we'll go through the manuscript on the phone, and I'll show you where to put in the love scenes." And I said, "Okay." She said, "If you revise it to please us, then we'll buy it." And I was like, "Well, okay, I'll give it a shot." So we sat down one day on the phone, and she went through, she had a copy and I had a copy, and she would tell me what page. She would say, "Now this is where you have to put a love scene," and she would tell me what had to happen in the love scene, like he would put his hand up her dress in this scene. At one point she says, "You're being awfully quiet. Am I embarrassing you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just taking notes." I put more sex in the book and revised it to their satisfaction, and they bought it, and that was my first book. So that was not easy by today's standards, really a Cinderella story, because I sold the first book that I ever wrote, which hardly ever happens to anyone. So I was very blessed in that respect. And I published 20 historical romances. And then my career kind of tanked because the publishers, because historical romances did so well, they decided to publish more and more and more of them. And what they forgot to do was create more readers. So they had the same number of readers. The readers just had 4 times as many books to choose from every month.
They saturated the market.
Yes.
So individual sales went down, and for many authors, and I was one of them. And so my publisher dropped me because my sales were so low. And my agent had been after me to try writing a mystery for a long time. I was actually trying to write a thriller. What I discovered is I really don't have a modern voice, that I have a historical voice. I'm much more comfortable with historicals. But I was sending her all these proposals for contemporary thrillers, and she called me up one day. She said, I just had lunch with an editor from Berkeley, and she said they're looking for somebody to write a series set in New York City where the heroine is a midwife. Would you be interested? She said, I thought of you. It's like, well, okay. Because my youngest daughter had just started college at NYU. So my husband and I had spent time walking around Greenwich Village. We'd even bought a couple books on the history of Greenwich Village because we were interested, So I'd already done some research, and I was working at that time for the March of Dimes, and some of my volunteers were midwives. Well, this is like, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little secret. Just between us, they said they were looking for someone to write a series set in medieval Mesopotamia for the Potter. I would have said, excuse me.
Of course you would.
Oh, that's funny.
Published again. So I wrote a proposal. They told me her name was Sarah Brand and that she was midwife. Their suggestion was that she was a poor relation of a wealthy family. I said, no. She needs to have the ability to move in all levels of society. So I made her the rebellious daughter.
Right.
Instead. And I knew she would need, as a midwife, she probably would not encounter a lot of murdered people in the course of her everyday life. So I gave her Frank as the sidekick, figuring he is as a police officer, it'd be his job to solve murders. And so that would help a lot with finding the dead bodies and getting them involved.
I don't know. Some of those wealthy families had some deep, dark secrets that they they didn't want anybody to know about.
Right. Asian always points out the rich people are much more interesting than poor people.
They can afford to be more interesting. If you could give any advice to new authors, what would you advise them to help them in their process?
Well, writers today are so much more fortunate than I was when I started, in that we have the internet and there's so much information available out there. There are many, many really good how-to books, no matter what kind of genre you want to write in or what kind of book you want to write. There's at least one really good how-to book out there that you can get. There are also many really good support organizations for writers. I mentioned Sisters in Crime. There's Mystery Writers of America. There's Romance Writers of America. There's all kinds of horror writers of America. Pretty much every genre has its own, at least one really good organization that you can join, and they will help you, teach you everything you need to know to get published. I actually teach in a master's degree program at Seton Hill University, which is in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. It's a master's program in writing popular fiction and low residency program. So you only spend a week on campus every semester, and then you go back home. It's for people who have real lives and can't take 2 years off of their job to get a master's degree. So this is designed especially for people who work and have lives. And they do everything online then during the semester, and your thesis is a novel. So you have a mentor assigned to you to help you critique your pages that you write every month. And at the end, you have a completed manuscript that's been thoroughly vetted by professionals. And you've learned pretty much everything you need to know. So that's
great.
That sounds wonderful.
That's like the extreme. Or you can pick up a lot of stuff that you need to know on the internet and by joining a writer's organization. So those would be my advice to you, to learn as much as you can before you get started, because you'll save yourself a lot of trouble if you know what's expected before you write the book.
Good advice. What writers inspire Victoria Thompson?
Oh, my. Well, in the beginning, it was actually, my husband was the news director at a TV station back then, and we were living in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And for some reason, this publisher sent him paperback books every month, and we never did figure out why, but he would get the books. And he'd bring them home to me. And at that time, I had 2 young children, and I was babysitting 5 kindergarten kids during the day. And I had just started reading for pleasure again. I had young children and babies and, didn't have much time for reading. So I just started reading for pleasure. So he brought home these books. So I was reading them. And one of them was a collection of Louis L'Amour short stories. And just to show you how completely out of it I was, I thought, this guy's pretty good. Man, I wonder if he's written anything else.
Yeah, one or two others.
Others. I went to the library, and of course they had a whole shelf of Louis L'Amour books, and I ended up reading every single one of them and branching out to read all kinds of other books. So Louis really inspired me, and it's kind of funny in the way he inspired me. And then I read like Zane Grey and Max Brand and a lot of other men who wrote mysteries or westerns, and I thought, I'd like to write a book. I was getting fed up with these books because the female characters always fainted at the wrong time, stupid, and got kidnapped and had to be rescued, and it was like, this was just really getting annoying. And I thought, I'm going to write a book where the heroine has a little spunk and maybe even rescues herself every now and then. So that was kind of my goal. I was going to write a western with a sensible heroine who was brave and, didn't faint and, all that stuff. So that was what I was aiming for the first time I wrote a book. So in that respect, Louis and his cohorts inspired me.
That's funny.
That's great.
Well, as we're wrapping up, we want to know if you have any upcoming events you want to tell our listeners about. You do have another Gaslight mystery coming out, I believe, soon.
I do. I have a Counterfeit Lady book coming out in November. Oh. That's my 10th series, and it only has one book in it so far. This will be the second book. The first one is called City of Lies, and the second book is called City of Secrets. And this series takes place also in New York City, and it's starts in 1917 when America had just entered World War I. But it focused on the suffragettes who were being thrown in prison at this time for protesting and demanding their right to vote. And my heroine is actually a con artist who is running away from a con that went really bad, and someone's after her to kill her. And she joins the suffragettes demonstrating out in front of the White House and gets herself arrested with them, thinking, that she'll be safe from these guys that are chasing her. They were arresting the suffragettes to try to scare them off, and all that accomplished was it just made them mad, and more came.
My grandmother was a suffragette.
Oh, God bless her.
Yes, she was. She was very proud of that fact.
We have news articles with her picture.
She got arrested several times.
Sure, that's wonderful news. Well, the day that Elizabeth gets arrested with them is the day they decide to teach these women a lesson, and they sentence them to 6 months in a workhouse.
Oh.
Her whole best laid plan kind of gets sidetracked. But she ends up in the workhouse with these women, and they convert her. And so she decides to start using her skills as a con artist to help people instead.
I'll have to read those.
Oh, that sounds good.
So that's what the series is. And the first book will be out in paperback in October, City of Lies, and the second one will be out in hardcover in November. So
great.
And then in May, actually April 30th. Usually they come out in May, but this time it's coming out in April 30th. Is the next Gaslight, and that'll be number 22 in the series. And that one's, you'll like that one because it features Mrs. Ellsworth quite a bit. Nelson has gotten married, and
well, I'm glad he found somebody after that last bit that he went through.
Well, this is kind of a bad experience too, because someone in his wife's family gets murdered.
Oh, dear.
So but Mrs. Ellsworth is there. And you'll notice that Mrs. Ellsworth now only gets one superstition per book. In the beginning,
in the beginning, it was every time Sarah went out the door, there was a new...
this whole book of superstitions, and I thought, I'm never going to run out. But what?
So that's great.
This superstition in this book worked out really well with the whole plot.
Good.
It takes on New Year's Eve in 1899, and there's superstitions around New Year's, so that was very easy.
Oh, very good.
Okay, well, we want to thank you so much for being on the show. We are so looking forward to all of your future books. We impatiently for the next one. and we want to wish you well, and we hope to talk to you again sometime.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you, Victoria.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was an amazing interview. I was blown away by Victoria.
Such a nice lady. She really was very pleasant.
Yes, you'd think some of these authors would be, a little uppity because they're so famous, but so far we've been very blessed.
Yes,
the authors
we have.
we've talked to.
I have put these authors, especially these in Agatha footstep authors, up on pedestals for so long that I